They say the Pacific was never truly silent. Even when guns fell quiet and the waves washed the beaches as if nothing had happened, the air carried a weight heavier than smoke. It carried a tension that did not show up in photographs or official reports. Japanese soldiers who had once marched with disciplined certainty began to speak in hushed tones about something they could not name. There were enemies they could see, artillery, tanks, fleets on the horizon, but those were expected dangers. What unnerved them were the sounds that arrived without warning, the precise cracks that echoed once and were followed by a silence deeper than any explosion. Men would collapse without seeing who fired. When medics searched the fallen, they found wounds so clean, so exact, that even the most seasoned field surgeons felt unsettled. They did not know it then, but this invisible fear had names: the M1911 pistol and the M1903 sniper rifle. In the heart of the Pacific Campaign, these two American weapons became more than tools. They became a grammar of a new kind of combat. Japan believed in spiritual strength, in the idea that a soldier's will could overcome machinery. War does not bow to belief. War bends to what works in the moment that life stops. And in those moments, the M1911 and the M1903 reshaped the rules of engagement. Long before these weapons made their presence felt, Japan entered the war with steady confidence. Its soldiers carried Arisaka rifles and bayonets, traditions and swords passed down through generations. But as American forces landed on island after island, an unexpected thing happened. The Japanese were not always met by massed volleys, but rather by singular, deliberate shots. On patrol, a man would raise his binoculars and then, as if the air itself had fired, he would fall. No scream, no second shot. The sniper did not need one. American Marines quietly slid through dense foliage with a weapon built for a single, grim purpose: to hit exactly where intended, no matter the distance. The M1903 Springfield was a bolt-action rifle that demanded patience and rewarded precision. It required a bolt to be cycled after each shot, a tempo some called slow, but that slowness was a myth. For the shooter behind the scope, time was measured differently. A single, perfect round was worth more than a dozen panicked ones. Japanese soldiers, used to the chaos and noise of battle, could not comprehend this patient rhythm. They expected fury and smoke. Instead, they met ghost-like calm. When those shadows moved closer, when combat grew personal, a different sound began to terrify those who had survived long-range shots. Not loud, not like a rifle's crack, but a heavy thud that came from the side, from behind, from where no one expected. That was the M1911, a sidearm so forceful it could halt a charging man with one pull of the trigger. Japanese sidearms were often symbols of rank, ceremonial and proud. The M1911 was not a symbol, it was a message. In close quarters, hesitation meant death. The pistol did not dance or shout, it simply ended whatever stood before it. No ceremony, no honor, just efficiency. At first, commanders dismissed field reports. A pistol is a secondary weapon, hardly worth attention. But men in the mud knew better. They described encounters in which bayonet charges, fueled by conviction, collapsed under a single, decisive shot. The M1911 did not offer drama, it offered finality. When a soldier surged forward, expecting to meet another man's eyes before the clash, he was instead met with a flash of metal, a short controlled recoil, and then silence. The pistol removed theater from combat, it ended it. Fear began not with death, but with the realization that death could come without warning, without a chance to answer. Soldiers found strange comfort in chaos, danger that could be seen or heard. The M1903 and the M1911 stripped that comfort away. The sniper erased men before they could locate the shooter. The pistol finished what the rifle began when the fight closed to arm's length. American Marines became hunters not through rage but design, move unseen, fire once, and never reveal your position. That doctrine spread faster than any official order. As tents burned and jungles swallowed the dying, an evolution occurred. The Americans were not merely fighting, they were learning to break an enemy's will without 1,000 bullets. Japanese forces, who prized honorable death, began to see a different kind of enemy, one who cared not for glory but for results. And results do not respect honor. On Peleliu, where reef dropped away like a throat into the sea, men learned terrain could become an ally to a hidden shooter. Coral ridges and shattered bunkers created blind spots. A sniper could become part of the landscape and wait until movement betrayed a human shape. The dogged patience of a sniper was not measured by kill counts, but by hours survived unseen. Marines learned to suspect every silhouette. A fisherman's hut, a torn curtain, a bent blade of grass, anything could conceal a scope. Men moved like a single nervous animal, ears straining for the metallic whisper of a bolt being cycled. They moved slower, more careful, as if each step might be their last audition for the eye that watched. The M1903's power lay in a promise. One perfect shot could erase a leader, a radio operator, the man with the map. Remove a navigator, and the patrol might wander into ambush. Remove a sergeant, and confusion would ripple through the ranks. Quiet accuracy did not merely kill bodies, it unstitched the fragile fabric of command and left units aimless at the edge of panic. When certainty is removed, fear replaces it. Fear is contagious. The M1911 functioned as the final arbiter in the chaos when distance closed. In cramped dugouts where light was rumor and every breath made sound, the pistol became a confession. It spoke the last word to those who barged in with steel and song. Marines adapted. They learned to move in pairs that watched pairs, to clear rooms with silent signals, to trust the weight of the 45 at their hip as much as the man beside them. The pistol changed how they closed with the enemy. It encouraged a discipline not born of civility but of survival. Japanese tactics that had relied on sudden charges and night raids began to fail. Where once blade and bravery were paramount, now numbers and anonymity were insufficient. Men dug deeper, lowered their heads, tried to make positions less individual, more communal, hoping numbers would blunt precise weapons. Precision found ways to slice through numbers. The Americans learned that the smallest tools sometimes cut the deepest. There were nights when an entire battalion felt the weight of a rifle barrel without knowing where it came from. The M1903's scope turned darkness into geometry. Silhouettes became coordinates, shadows became targets. A Marine would sit like stone on a jagged ridge, while his partner moved undercover to bring flares or water. Knowing his role might be silent for hours until a figure stepped into the wrong angle of light. Snipers described their work as ritual camouflage painted with mud, spare rations left untouched, breath controlled until it felt as thin as a thread. They kept logbooks not exactly of kills but of moments. The time, the wind, how leaves trembled with a man's breath. Those moments added up into patterns that could be read and exploited. Once a patrol fell into a pattern, it became predictable. Japanese counter, sniper tactics, decoys, noisy patrols, masked night movements could do only so much. A well-trained sniper could tell at once whether a silhouette moved with purpose or with trembling desperation. The M1911 complemented the long-range terror by occupying the dirty business of close fighting where tactics broke down. When a bunker yielded or a soldier breached a trench, the pistol's presence made hesitation fatal. It was a tool for those who had seen too much and asked for something absolute. Soldiers began practicing silence drills and rehearsing exits because the pistol erased flamboyance. The power of these weapons rested not only in metal and powder, but in doctrine. When doctrine shifted toward patient, quiet lethality, the battlefield bent. Stories blurred lines between heroism and method D. A scout's single shot from a ridge halted an assault. A corporal who kept his pistol in a boot found its weight when a bayonet lunged too close. A medic used a rifle to silence a hidden threat while tending a life. The soldiers who wielded these weapons were not cinematic duelists, but men with stretched nerves carrying instruments of calm in a world of ruptured noise. They learned to value small acts, a whispered signal, a hand pressed to the ground to feel a distant footstep, the precise easing of a bolt. Across the Pacific, the calculus of survival changed. Patrols were planned expecting to be watched by an invisible scope. Leaders moved cautiously, knowing a single clear shot could cleave a unit's will. Back home, families received neat envelopes with dates and places. Inside those lines lay a new geography of fear. The intimate map of where a man stood, how he moved, the angle of light on his cheek. If you look at the numbers, the M1903 and the M1911 were instruments among many. There were thousands of rifles, pistols, machine guns, grenades. Yet the psychological weight of a weapon is not measured by inventory but by reaction. A single sniper can paralyze a flank. A single precise shot can unravel a plan. The Allies learned to leverage that asymmetry. Training emphasized marksmanship, concealment, and restraint. The best snipers were not those who fired most, but those who chose their shots with the shrewdness of chess players. They struck surgically. The M1911 influenced how soldiers approached the final phase of combat. Room-clearing drills, hand-to-hand preparedness, and keeping pistols within reach became formalized. Where rifles once dominated, planners adjusted. The presence of a reliable sidearm changed expected outcomes of trench raids and bunker fights. It made small unit leadership more decisive because leaders knew pistols could resolve the last chaotic meters. That interplay, long-range mindscapes and short-range finality, created a rhythm for engagements. Like a conductor preferring a subtle string to an entire brass section, commanders orchestrated battle toward small, decisive moments. The Japanese response evolved. They refined camouflage, developed decoy tactics, trained pickets to change positions, dug deeper, layered defensive perimeters, integrated mutual covering fire. Engineers built complex bunkers with angled slits to reduce sniper sightlines. Some units sent forward scouts, specifically to provoke reaction and expose concealed shooters. Others conducted mass night raids designed to drown a sniper's advantage in movement and shadow. Yet adaptation takes time in war. Time is a currency many cannot afford. By the time countermeasures were organized, doctrine and morale had shifted on several fronts. The Americans, backed by industrial depth, could produce scoped rifles and train marksmen. The pistol's familiarity made it easy to distribute widely. Its stopping power made it effective even in nervous hands. On the receiving end, Japanese troops felt squeezed between long-range watchers and short-range executioners. Some reported a strange reluctance to attack at all. Men began to conserve, to pick their battles, to avoid unnecessary sorties. A culture that prized honor and aggression found itself learning patience. Survive now, fight later. That psychological shift, perhaps more than any single statistic, altered the war's conduct in ways maps rarely show. After the war, the story these weapons told became complicated. They were tools that worked within logistics, leadership, and culture. Veteran memoirs sometimes praised them in reverent phrases while historians debated their tactical significance next to artillery and ships. Yet private letters and whispered recollections return to the same theme. The M1903 and M1911 introduced an intimate terror not captured by headline statistics. For a young private, hearing a leader had fallen from nowhere shaped how he saw the world. For officers, it demanded patience and respect for concealment. Militaries worldwide studied the lesson. Sniping evolved from anecdote into doctrine. Camouflage techniques, range estimation, spotter, shooter teams with a shared centered purpose. Sidearm design philosophies shifted toward reliability and stopping power. Influenced by what had been learned in the Pacific, civilian marksmen and police organizations studied the M1911's ergonomics and ballistic effects, adapting aspects for peacetime use. The weapons left footprints beyond islands and coral ridges. They shifted thinking about what a soldier needed to survive both close and distant dangers. There is a quieter aftermath rarely found in textbooks, the moral residue carried by those who used these weapons. To press a trigger and watch a man fall from a distance brings a different burden than to be in the scrum and see eyes searching for explanation. Snipers sometimes describe their work as clinical and therefore easier. Others confess to late, night visions of faces, the angle of light when a man moved. Pistol fights left their marks too. The suddenness of death in the face of a charge could make survivors question the value of ritual bravery if ritual led only to senseless ends. Veterans returned to communities that preferred tidy narratives of glory, but many carried stories of quiet, awkward, necessary violence that did not fit parades. The weapons themselves remained mute, lying in armories or repurposed for peacetime. Yet each story told renewed the legacy of those tools, reshaped by memory and the demand to make sense of what had been done in the name of survival. Decades later, historians attempt to reconcile the grand sweep of nations with the tiny mechanisms of death. The M1911 and M1903 sit in museums, cold under careful lights. Visitors read plaques and imagine thunderous battle. Few imagine the hush. Few realize that a rifle's silence can be as decisive as a battleship's broadside. For those who were there, the silence was everything. It taught new strategies, hardened old ones, and left scars both visible and invisible. The M1903 taught patience, the M1911 taught finality, and together they reshaped how war was fought in the Pacific's tight theaters. They did not win the war alone. Nothing so small could claim that, but they changed how men moved, how they feared, and how they survived. That subtle change, accumulated in thousands of small decisions and a million silent moments, is as consequential as any headline. Listen to history not only for what it shouts, but for what it whispers. Between the clamor of fleets and the boom of artillery lies another story, the one the islands still remember: patience, precision, and the quiet things that end a life without warning. The battlefield's language had been altered. The men who fought there sent home letters that could not fully explain it. They returned with memories of single shots and sudden endings, with the knowledge that wars are sometimes decided in the space between breath and bullet. And when you stand before the artifacts now, the cold metal of a pistol or the glass of a scope, remember that they once spoke a terrifyingly simple line: the world had changed, and those who adapted lived to tell the tale.